Welcome to the We Choose Life panel, We Chose Life panel that Students for Life Action is putting on in advance of the State of the Union address. Right now, members of Congress and their staff, members of the media, and people across the country are joining together to hear an alternative story. My name is Kristi Hamrick, and I'm Vice President for Media and Policy for Students for Life Action, Students for Life of America. We have more than 1,400 groups in all 50 states, and we focus in particular on rallying the youth vote, the generation most targeted for abortion, now 1/3 of the electorate. And on these issues, these critical issues of who should be aborted, this is something that we're talking about on college campuses every day. And I'm sure many of you have heard the story of Kate Cox, the Texas mother who found she was pregnant with a baby diagnosed with trisomy 18 and tried to force the state of Texas to abort the child in Texas, although her life was not in danger. She eventually left the state to get an abortion. But in the wake of this, there's been a large conversation about how fetal diagnosis needs to be added to the reasons for abortion, to the traditional reasons for abortion, people who are conceived in rape and incest, to the life of the mother, which is a separate category because we do want to save women's lives. And we're going to have a pro-life doctor on later to tell you how that's done, because that's a thing, getting a doctor who wants to save everybody. But today we're going to start off with Kristan Hawkins. Kristan, she's president of Students for Life. She built it from nothing to the powerhouse that it is today, but she understands how to confront those arguments that some people must be aborted. 3 of her 4 children have a genetic condition, a lifetime condition. And rather than that being the end of their story, that was beginning of a family adventure. Kristan, what's it like to hear all the time that your children should have been aborted? And what's it like to deal with that kind of pressure?
I think thanks, Kristi, and thanks for having all of us and organizing all of us to be on today. But I do think it's difficult to hear that over and over again, that your children are a reason why other children should be aborted. And I think it's difficult for children to hear that as well. As my children have grown up. My oldest child, Gunnar, who's 15, who has cystic fibrosis, he's asked that question of, why do they justify abortion because of me? What is wrong with me? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with Gunnar. And I think it's very sad when you see this mentality seep in, specifically to our medical professionals, those who have gone to college, spent an exorbitant amount of student loans, all with the aim of wanting to prolong life, to make and help humanity be at its most fit and healthy, but then also to have doctors there and medical professionals there in the field who then would say publicly, take on their Twitter, that some people are just better off dead, as if they don't count. And I think when you're thinking about all of the challenges that plague our nation right now, this really comes down. We talk about the abortion issue, discounting human beings because of their location, their size, their age, their genetic makeup. It's dangerous for all of us, even if you have never been involved in an unplanned pregnancy, you're not thinking or care to think about the preborn human in the womb. This is dangerous thinking for all of us, because it's not just stopping with abortion, as we all see with the stories in Canada and Europe, across the world, of those who've been diagnosed with a life-limiting illness, told that their time that they'll be alive has been shortened, and they're immediately sent a letter in the mail, sometimes from the state Medicaid here in the United States, offering drugs so they could kill themselves, and really setting this signal up to our most weakest, our most vulnerable in our world, that you only count if you provide, or if you can do so much for the rest of us. And if you can't make whatever threshold that is, there, you no longer count, you no longer matter. When you look at the conversations that I have with young people on campuses all the time, this is a significant problem, where young people today, more than any other generation, when I ask them a question of what you just said, that my son and my daughter who have cystic fibrosis don't count, or don't count as much, what makes you count? What gives your life value and meaning? Is it really the perception of other people and how other people value your life? Or are you valuable just because of who you are? Because you were made in our creator's image. That gives you value, and that should give us all value as human beings. And so I just want to speak to kind of that just to start out, because I think it's definitely a challenge that we see on campus in our conversations. And it doesn't just stop with prenatal diagnoses that have gone wrong. We're not ending or curing cystic fibrosis or Down syndrome or spina bifida by eliminating those human beings. You don't end the suffering by ending the sufferer. And that should just be common sense that, yes, we have empathy and we want to stand with families who've received an adverse prenatal diagnosis, but that's not the end of the story. And I can tell you personally, I've never met another mom, another cystic fibrosis mom, another mom who's had a child with Down syndrome or a trisomy, who regrets allowing their child to live, because these human beings are so special. And I often think they teach us so much more about our own value when we look at their lives and the struggles that they overcome every day.
Kristan, that's so well said. And I want to expand the definition of who deserves to die. Students for Life talks a lot about how we reject prejudice against people based on age, sex, race, parental income, stage of development, and fetal diagnosis, but in addition to the events of conception. For years, we've been told that how a person comes to be, that is the most important thing somehow, so that people conceived in rape are somehow not people. My mother's best friend was a person conceived in rape, and I love that woman so much. But I want to bring another person here who I love and admire, Ryan Bomberger. Ryan, you have a story to tell about how the beginning of your story isn't the end of the story, or even your story today. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I'm from a small family of 15. I grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and I had two parents who rescued and redeemed storylines that the rest of the world would say that a child wouldn't amount to anything, that child will never be able to accomplish this. And they shattered all of that. They shattered the myth of the unwanted child. And I definitely am in that category, because I'm the 1% that's used 100% of the time to justify abortion. In fact, people will tell me to my face that I should have been aborted. It's a really weird feeling to be told that. But although I was conceived in rape, I was adopted in love. And so that family of 15 that I was talking about, 13 kids, I have 6 brothers, 6 sisters, 10 of us were adopted, and from all kinds of broken backgrounds. And it's amazing what happens when people choose to be resilient. Not just my parents, but the birth parents who chose the very difficult option of adoption that gave us that incredible gift. I was the first adopted in this multicolor family. We're white, and black, Native American, Vietnamese, able, disabled, loved like crazy, and given the opportunity to thrive, because no one can thrive when they're not alive. And it bothers me so much when people think that death is somehow the easier solution. Easier for whom? It wasn't easier for us. And part of my background too is meeting the love of my life, Bethany, who was a single mom in her late 20s as a teacher, found herself pregnant, faced with an unplanned pregnancy, pressured by her boyfriend to have an abortion. And she refused. And thank God, because that's my oldest daughter. And I love her like crazy. Her name is Radiance. And she is now 19 years old. She's a college freshman. And I thank God for an incredible wife who was stronger than the violence of abortion. And we have 4 kiddos, 2 of whom were adopted. I adopted my oldest, Radiance. She became a Bomberger. I was the only dad she's ever known. And our youngest son, whose name is Justice, he was also adopted. He had a single mom who was in horrific circumstances. And thank God, because we continue to love her and there was a support system around her, she got her life back on her feet, but also gave us the gift of her second son. And his name is Justice. I can't imagine life without him. So there are a lot of reasons why I'm passionate about this, but for people to say that I should have been aborted, they miss out on the other people, countless people. And it's not about me, it's about how God impacts so many of us, but other people impacted because I exist, because my birth mom chose to be stronger than her circumstances.
Well, Ryan, I know your story has really inspired all of us for years. And Representative Bob Good from Virginia has taken a page out of Ronald Reagan's playbook. And I'm saying Ronald Reagan because people are trying to say that the Democrats lately are better at State of the Union guests. But I think Representative Good's onto something. And I wanted to throw it to you. Representative Good has a special announcement. He's got a special guest coming to the State of the Union, and I want to ask you who it is and why, even though I kind of
Well,
already
thank you. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me and let me participate with this distinguished group. And it's great to meet Ryan Bomberger by video. And I look forward to meeting him this week when he joins me as my special guest for the State of the Union. What a wonderful story and testimony that he has. You know, as a born-again Christian, I believe the most Christ-like thing that people do that I've seen is to adopt. You know, when we recognize that apart from Christ, we are helpless and hopeless, and God adopts us in and under the blood of Christ, and we're brothers and sisters in Christ adopted in. What a great testimony example for those who did what Ryan's mother did, put him up for adoption, and those who came, his parents, and adopted him. And there's stories all over the country of that, and what a great testimony.
Representative Good, how important is this kind of storytelling? You're up on Capitol Hill and there are bills flying around, you know, friendly fire, unfriendly fire on a daily basis. How important do you find storytelling to achieving passage or blocking bad legislation? What's your experience?
It's critically important because when you talk to individuals who've moved from I'll say a pro-choice, I often will call it pro-abortion, but a pro-choice position to a pro-life position, it's so often because of an encounter they had, whether it's a personal experience or someone they knew or what they saw in an ultrasound or someone that they met. And it's stories that tend to change lives, and real stories like Ryan's story. You know, we shouldn't be deciding, you know, in advance which lives are worth saving, which quality of life, as some might measure or try to predict, is worth living. All life is precious. All life is precious from conception. All life deserves to be protected. And as Kristan said, it's a very, very dangerous thing when we put a value on that. We decide maybe at the end of life when life is not worth living, or maybe when someone develops a health situation or becomes physically or mentally disabled in some way, or from conception, there's some kind of supposedly, and often they're wrong, by the way, but supposedly there's some challenge that's been identified in the womb for which it's not worth having that child, some would say. That's a very dangerous thing. And as you mentioned, Ronald Reagan famously said he's noticed that everybody who's in favor of abortion has already been born. And I've never met that parent who wished they didn't have that child, no matter what the circumstances were or what the challenges might be after birth. I've never met that person who says, gosh, I wish, because my current situation or my birth situation wasn't ideal storybook or the way that everybody might plan it. I've never met anyone who said, I wish that my mother had chosen abortion.
Ryan, what is the one thing you'd like members of Congress to hear from you when you go up to Capitol Hill on Thursday and confront what I expect to be an abortion roadshow, to be clear, to be political for 2 seconds? I think the Democrats have done a really great job at killing economies and killing foreign relations and killing the preborn. You know, that seems to be their one go-to deliverable. What are we going to say when you're up there? What's the message?
That's me. I'm sorry.
No,
That's to me.
When you're up there at Capitol Hill and talking to the press, what's the one thing you want them to know? And then I got a special guest coming up. I can't wait to introduce him to y'all. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, I'm the tangible example of what they so easily reject in the abstract. It's so easy when you're talking about bills and you're talking about legislation, when you've actually dehumanized somebody to the point where it doesn't matter. But when they're standing before you and I'm the real flesh and blood example of what you're trying to eliminate, I know that on college campuses, it changes minds. And I'm sure in Congress, it can also change hearts and minds too. I am the reality of what happens when people choose to love and when birth parents choose to be stronger than their circumstances. So I'm looking for some change hearts and minds.
Well, I cannot wait to play Where's Ryan when I'm watching the State of the Union. I know I'm going to be looking for you as well, Representative Good. I know you had to leave us early and we wanted to come to you first. We have another special guest in the middle of traveling. Where we're going to go next as a panel is talking to people who had the experience with trisomy 18 in regards to a fetal diagnosis, but made a very different choice. First, I'd like to go to Senator Rick Santorum, who's kindly joined us, and I appreciate you being here. People know Rick Santorum as a former presidential candidate, as a senator from Pennsylvania. I tell you, though, one of my Rick Santorum memories, I was in the Senate gallery when you were debating and arguing on behalf of children to survive partial birth abortion, and that baby cried. People who have never Googled it, you should Google it. It's on C-SPAN still. He makes an impassioned defense, and a child cries, and the hairs, everybody in the gallery, because you know how it can be raucous, pro-abortion, pro-life. Hair on the back of our neck stood up. It was a truly epic moment. Senator Santorum, tell us about your experience with Trisomy 18 and your precious daughter. Oh, we're not hearing volume.
Okay, there, sorry.
Oh, there we go. Yay, we're
had the mute button on. I apologize for that. Back in 2008, we were blessed with our seventh child, who we knew that there might be some issues, but of course we didn't do any prenatal testing. We didn't care. We'll take whatever God has blessed us with, and He blessed us with the most incredible little girl. We were told at the time that she was going to die. In fact, when she came home from the hospital 10 days later, she came home on hospice, and we were told that she was just a matter of time before she died. And we had all this treatment about preparing for death. And after a very, very short period of time, we decided, well, that's not the way we wanted to live her life and have her live her life. That we were going to treat her like any other child, which is to give her the best, to give her every chance we could. And now, almost 16 years later, this little girl has broken all the odds. It's hard to say as a parent, you have a favorite child. It's not a very smart thing to do. But Bella's everybody's favorite brother, sister, and child. I mean, she is just the center of the family. She is someone who just brings joy to us every single day. Sure, she has her struggles, but all of our kids have had struggles. Life is a struggle. The idea that somehow or another, because you have a special needs kid, that somehow or another your life is going to be demonstrably worse. I can tell you, I know a lot of people who don't have special needs kids whose life is a lot tougher than having a child like Bella. The reality is, God will give you what you can handle, and He did. And we wrote a book a few years ago, Karen and I did, called Bella's Gift, because Bella has been a tremendous gift to our family. Every chapter begins with the word love, because in the 18 chapters, Trisomy 18, we wrote 18 chapters. The reason is because Bella taught us every different aspect of love that we could possibly imagine, that just showed us God's love and the power of love in our human relationships. So when I hear that Joe Biden is going to be bringing someone to the State of the Union to celebrate the killing of a little baby that had the same condition as my daughter, I was outraged. In fact, at the time that this case was going on and Kate Cox had announced what she was going to do, I decided to get out there and show her a picture of my daughter and tell her of the joy that she brought, and that this is not, because your daughter is not well, the answer isn't to kill her. I mean, or if your son's not well, you don't kill them. You love them and you accept them and you give them every opportunity for life, but you certainly don't. If that little baby was 6 months old as opposed to 6 months gestational, and you said, well, I found out that baby has a disease and is going to die, let's just kill them now. It's insane. I mean, people would say that's horrific. Yet when it's 6 months in the womb, it's okay. In fact, it's a good thing. This is the insanity that we're facing when it comes to the dignity of human life. And I'm just glad that I've had the opportunity, Karen and I and our family have had the opportunity to be a witness to what the beauty of every single life is.
For all our guests, if you go to the website, you will find personal stories from each of them and some pictures of their beautiful children. And Senator Santorum's beautiful daughter Bella is there on the website as well. People focus on the challenges a lot. You've got 7 children, so you already have challenges. I have 4, so I guess I have 3 less challenges. But Is it, is parenting a child who has a known health issue any different than parenting a child who maybe has never heard the word study? Just joking.
Yeah, look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat how difficult it can be and challenging it can be to raise a special needs kid. There's no question. I mean, they have special needs, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually harder on you or your family. And it may be, it may not be. As I said, given the problems that we're confronting in this world and the kids are confronting in this world, quote, normal kids are confronting this world, I sometimes think we have it easy because Bella's not confronted with any of this garbage that the world is feeding our children today, because she's just not capable of being confronted by it. And that, in some respects, we're blessed. It's easier to have this sweet, innocent little girl who is always going to be sweet and innocent. And I talk about the lessons that Bella teaches us, and one is just that innocence, and how children are in fact really innocent if they're not polluted by the world around them. So she's sort of a picture to us of what children maybe used to be like or could be like in a world. The other thing she taught me is, because she is profoundly disabled, and very early on in her life, I remember sitting and looking at her and wondering how long she was going to be with us, but realizing that this little girl will never bring me a cup of coffee and will never help me with anything around the house. She's completely disabled, and I just kept looking at that. But I was so overwhelmed with the fact that she loved me, and that you could tell she just connected with me, and that was enough. And it came to me that that's how God sees us, as completely disabled. We can do nothing for him. And all he wants for us is to love him. And so, the lessons that Bella has taught us over and over again, have they been more than the rest of our kids? I don't know, but they've certainly been more profound in our lives.
Senator, thank you so much for that. And I really appreciate you joining us. I know you had a lot of travel logistics today, so we're very, very thankful about that. And if you have to go, we understand. If you can stay, we would welcome it. But I want to bring in some of our other special guests. Many of you have heard of Dr. Ingrid Skop. She's at the Charlotte Lozier Institute, more than 30 years in practice, OB-GYN. And I think under her photo, they say what a pro-life doctor looks like, except over at Planned Parenthood, I'm sure they say something very different. Dr. Skop is also right now involved in that lawsuit that's at the Supreme Court, in which she is trying to stand up for patients who've been harmed by chemical abortion pills, which anyone who knows me, that I'm obsessed by that. So that's a long-term side project, stopping those pills. It's only been going on 30 years. But Dr. Skop, I think one of the things that gets me, and I'm going to introduce our next two guests, because all of you, the next three, you and our next two wonderful guests, are dealing every day with people who have fetal diagnosis. Beverly Jacobson is the founder of Verity's Village. She also had a pregnancy in which she had a child with trisomy 18. And from that has started a ministry, a support system, and outreach to people with other fetal diagnosis. And one of their team members is Kathryn Kerr, who's a registered neonatal nurse. One of my children was in the NICU. Those are angels. And so she also had a diagnosis of trisomy 18. And everyone's story did not end the same way. I want to hear everyone's stories. But in each case, both Kathryn and Beverly had a diagnosis, the same as Senator Santorum, and responded differently. And then, Dr. Skop, I want to come to you after they tell your stories to say, what's the right medical response to this? Because I know, Beverly, there's a response that you got was very different than the pressure that Kathryn got. So, Beverly, why don't we start with you? And I will say that I came across Beverly through reading an op-ed that she wrote at Newsweek, which I highly recommend. So Beverly, tell us a little bit more about Verity and your story.
Thank you so much for having us. Well, I was 18 weeks pregnant with our youngest child when I got that phone call from the doctor and first heard trisomy 18 and Edwards syndrome. I had no idea what those words meant. I had never heard of this condition. And that phone call, and then honestly, the follow-up Google research showed very dire information. And honestly, for us from the outset, carrying Verity to term was not even a decision. We believe that all life has intrinsic value. And so abortion was not an option for us. And we came to the table every medical appointment, making that clear. And so we did not experience personal pressure to abort. Now, we did have encounters with medical professionals who made it very clear that they had quite different opinions about that. In fact, one professional actually talked to me about my, quote, retarded daughter. He used those words. He said that if she were to be born alive, she would live a, quote, futile life, that she would be a drain on our family, mentally and emotionally and financially. So it became clear that the attitudes in the medical community were not what we felt about our own experience, about our own baby. So while we personally did not experience pressure to abort, many, if not most of the families who come into the Verity's Village community are constantly offered and even pushed toward abortion. Sometimes appointment after appointment, they encounter these narratives. At least in a couple of cases we know about, mom was actually scheduled for an abortion before she even knew about her diagnosis. And after all, many in the medical world will say that trisomy 18 or some of these other conditions are incompatible with life. And so based on the dire statistics that we were learning about and all of the frightening information that was online, we spent the first few weeks after getting our diagnosis preparing to bury our baby. And then we got connected with some online support groups, and I started seeing pictures and videos of babies and children and even teenagers, young adults who had this same condition, and they were living, they were joyful, they were clearly well-loved members of their families. And I started to realize that maybe instead of preparing for our baby to die, maybe we need to be preparing for her to live. And I'll be entirely honest, I was already the mother of 8 healthy children, and I was feeling quite overwhelmed myself. I was very fearful about what it would look like to be a mother to a child who had profound needs. And yet at the same time, I still believed with all my heart that Verity, like every other person on the planet, was created on purpose, for a purpose, just the way she was, with that extra 18th chromosome and all. And yet I know how frightening this is. I know that nobody really wants to bury a baby, and yet very few people will actually sign up to be a mother of a child with profound needs. Now, our family had all kinds of support on this journey. Our medical team, by and large, was supportive of our desire to carry to term and to give Verity any interventions that she might need in order to thrive. We had all kinds of support, and yet this journey was still so difficult. And we realized that most people are not going to have the level of support that we did. And that is why 3 years ago, we launched Verity's Village, so that we could provide practical as well as intangible support. We want to be a village for the people who need this kind of support. It's a hard journey. We want families to know that if they are experiencing a situation like this, there is hope. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not an easy journey, no matter what happens with your child, but there is beauty and there's joy and there's growth when you can love and care for a child who is completely 100% dependent on you, all of his or her life. We've worked with hundreds of families around the United States and even around the globe. And honestly, many of them do end up bereaved. And it is hard. It is a grief journey. But you know what? We hear over and over, these families come back to us and they say, I would do it all over again to have those 5 hours, those 56 minutes or 7 months or 5 days, whatever they had with their child. They treasure that time. Termination is not going to take away anyone's grief. It only takes away the opportunity to create memories with your baby, to experience any kind of joy and blessing on this journey. So our Verity today is 7 years old. She actually just had her birthday last week, celebrated with much fanfare with her siblings who adore her. I can attest to what Mr. Santorum was saying earlier. Our family, Verity is the center of it. We love her. She is well loved by everyone who meets her. She's a delight in her little school setting, our church, our community. She's thriving. She's not suffering in any way. And for that matter, She has helped all of us become better human beings.
That's an amazing testimony. Kathryn, I know you have a beautiful story about your daughter, Indiana, but you didn't get the same level of medical support, I know. Tell us, and then also being a nurse in the NICU, you see people in a really dark moment. Tell us your story and tell us about Indiana.
So, like you said, I was met with different sort of options when I got my diagnosis. I was 10 weeks pregnant and 42 years old, so it was highly recommended that I have the maternal blood screen based on my age. I had never done that before with any of my other children because it didn't matter to me. And it didn't matter to me then, but with my age and the increased risk of Down syndrome, I thought maybe that's what I would be facing. Wanted to prepare just in case. So I had the blood work done. About 2 weeks later, I get the phone call and they said your baby has a 1 in 17 chance of trisomy 13 or 18. When do you want to schedule your abortion? And I said, no, that's not what I want. And they went on to explain it was futile to, even attempt to carry to term, especially being the age that I was at. And I started doing my own research. Being the nurse in the clinical setting, I knew what I was going to face as well. The hospital that I had worked at, I knew they were not going to treat my daughter the same way they would any other baby. So I made a backup plan. I found a hospital in Philadelphia that would treat her well. So I made a plan to see them after a confirmed amniocentesis. So I saw a doctor about an hour away from home in the interim who every appointment told me I was silly, crazy for wanting to even attempt to carry to term, that he would monitor me only and not my baby. So as soon as I went to Philadelphia and I met this new positive care team who would support me in my journey, I decided to change course and we relocated to Philadelphia to deliver Indiana. Very early, I think maybe a month before our official diagnosis with amnio, I stumbled across Verity's Village in Beverly and I got to see the hope. I started connecting with other parents who carried to term, who are living this amazing life for their children, and it gave me hope. It was that hope that sustained me through my entire pregnancy, because all the babies that I had seen with trisomy 13 and 18 didn't live very long at all because they were denied the interventions they needed at birth. So I made a promise to myself that once this was over, I was going to go back and somehow support other mothers, which is what I do now with Beverly and Verity's Village. I work with moms. We make birth plans. I meet them where they're at. Sometimes they've just gotten their diagnosis and they're weighing out their options. And I have the opportunity to share my story and the stories of the other members of the group, the joy that we feel in carrying to term. Just like Beverly said, the grief isn't going to go away with the abortion. You're going to have another grief. Indiana lived for just over 6 weeks and she was curious and she was funny and she smiled, and I got to watch my husband be a father, and I would do it over and over again for those for the memories and the joy she brought us and the joy she still brings us. She would have been 3 yesterday, and we celebrated her birthday just like we would have any of our other children. And now she has, this legacy that lives on in all the other children that we help along the way.
Kathryn, that's just beautiful. Dr. Skop, it has to be both touching and frustrating for you to hear how people were advised to abort without any conversation. What would a life-affirming medical professional such as yourself do when you realize that a patient might have a fetal diagnosis? And I also wanted to ask you to address the fact that fetal diagnoses they're not Bible verses. They can be wrong. So there's the fact that you can get the wrong diagnosis, and then there's the fact that the assumption is end the sufferer and not deal with the suffering. So tell us about what is a better response.
Thank you, Kristi, and thank you all of you for these beautiful stories. And I am sorry to have to acknowledge that the field of obstetrics has been captured by eugenics. I wrote some notes because there's so many things I want to say, and I want to make sure I don't forget anything. Like all obstetricians who adhere to the Hippocratic Oath, I follow a two-patient paradigm. I'm blessed to care for both a mother and her unborn child. But as we're discussing today, in the pursuit of overturning state pro-life protections and returning to abortion on demand for any reason, abortion advocates have dishonestly directed attention toward families who've received a heartbreaking diagnosis of a life-limiting fetal condition. They sometimes tell women that they must immediately end their unborn child's life through a painful dismemberment abortion in order to prevent the possibility of a threat to the mother's life. If a threat exists, every state law allows a doctor to use his reasonable medical judgment to determine when to intervene, but it is rarely, if ever, necessary to intentionally end the child's life. The first step I take when a patient receives an adverse diagnosis is to reassure his mother and family that I will continue to provide the best quality care for both of my patients. I offer congratulations because this living child is now a member of that family, although not yet born. I do not offer to kill my patient just because he faces medical challenges. As you mentioned, screening tests are frequently inaccurate and falsely positive, so I will perform additional testing to determine if the diagnosis is correct. I advise the family that I do not have the ability to see the future, to know how severe the child's impairment may be, and we will continue to hope and pray for the best. I acknowledge the heartache they are experiencing, the potential loss of the plans they had for their child, and I walk alongside them as they adjust to the awareness of the unanticipated path their child's life may take. I will assemble a multidisciplinary team to care for the mother and child, and we will discuss the diversity of treatment options available, including sometimes in utero surgery. Many children with conditions that were once termed incompatible with life are now recognized to have the ability to live days, months, or years with supportive treatment. It is not necessary to provide every existing medical procedure, but perinatal palliative care allows the medical team and family to decide in advance the interventions they would desire in a given situation. Regardless of the medical interventions chosen, the child will be treated for any potential pain and will have the opportunity to be held in his family's loving arms for however long his life may last. The opportunity to say goodbye will undoubtedly soften the grief process for his family after his death. Most importantly, I will emphasize to the family that I will be their advocate and support as they travel this unknown journey. This is the way to practice ethical, life-affirming care for the most vulnerable in our society. Many of you may be aware that Pearl S. Buck, the famous author, had a disabled child. She had phenylketonuria and was significantly growth restricted, as well as she had severe mental impairments. And she wrote, "It was my child who taught me to understand so clearly that all people are equal in their humanity and that all have the same human rights. None is to be considered less as a human being than any other, and each must be given his place and a safety in the world. I might never have learned this in any other way. I might have gone on in my arrogance of my own intolerance for those less able than myself. My child taught me humanity." And I would offer that we need more children like this in our society to regain our respect for humanity.
Yeah, Kristan, I want to bring you back in now too. I think one of the variables that we look at, and this was a question that was sent to me before, is how in the middle of all these conversations, the presumption that your life is supposed to be exactly the way that you thought it should be. And I will say one thing, 3 of my 4 pregnancies were high risk, and I've experienced life-affirming care where 2 of us are in the room. Fortunately, we all walked away. But I'm just saying that it's a very difference in tone. But the assumption that it should be as you think it should be, you should have the origin story, and I think each of y'all could address that. Ryan, let me start with you, but then Kristan, you next. I mean, the idea that should everybody's story, is there a cookie cutter way, which it has to be this way? This is the story. You know, aren't we missing something to life in that presumption?
Well, we live in a culture that talks about diversity all the time, but yet when we give you diverse examples of origin stories, they want to dismiss it and reject it. And that's the sad thing about it. One thing, stories move our hearts all the time. And that's why mainstream media often works so hard, and why activists work so hard to silence these stories. I mean, I'm trying to control myself just listening to some of the heartbreaking stories, but I love how the narratives are changed to hope. And that's what so many people are missing by not hearing this diversity of experiences that have led to wholeness and healing and hope that defies all the world's low expectations. So that's why we should. And as a messenger, as someone who crafts messaging with our organization, the Radiance Foundation, I'm really passionate about trying to tell these stories, because people know it changes people's hearts. I love when I go into a college event and I've had people at the end who say, I wanted to hate you when you came in, but I've never heard a story like yours. And that's the point. They transform situations, they transform people.
Kristan, you're on campuses all the time. They can't even decide if it's a person unless you made a decision that you accept them. You know, that's kind of part of the problem here, isn't it? You're not a person. If I say you're not a person, we're all going to vote who's a person. Yeah, me.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge problem, Chris. I mean, that's why when we're on campuses, we're talking about science. We're talking about fact, not conjecture. It's not, your humanity doesn't derive from someone else's feelings of who you are, right? There is a scientific fact that the moment of conception, you became you, and you were uniquely valuable, and you had a purpose here. And I think that's just, it's so sad when we start to go into this utilitarian mindset on campuses, and in these discussions we have with people who think that your value only drives what you give to other people. And I think, you know, as difficult it is to sometimes talk about our personal stories that we all each have, I think it's very important to be out there sharing these stories. Kathryn sharing her story of her daughter, Beverly and Ryan, even myself, because I think it brings home, we're not just arguing for the sake of argument or some philosophical justification for protecting these human lives. These are our precious children, and they had value. And I think once you meet these children, once you see their pictures, it's very hard for anyone, regardless of their view on abortion or where they may stand politically, to deny that these human beings the right to life.
Yeah, you know, Dr. Skop, I wish you would address briefly. People keep acting as though with an abortion, you've solved the problem, that abortion takes away the pain. I know you've worked in the pro-life space a long time. I mean, the pain's still there. What's your experience when you're dealing with women who are struggling with a diagnosis and then struggling with abortion, and then to be the instrument of your child's end? How does that add to the grief?
Yeah, and this is the reason that I'm as vocal as I am in the pro-life movement, because I've seen the pain of the women. In 30 years as an obstetrician, I just was increasingly aware that even if we're discussing a pregnancy event from 20 years ago, women would tear up when they recalled their abortion. So I recognize that women are just harmed emotionally, often physically, and many times with mental health complications. And we recently published a study that documented that 60% of women who chose an abortion many times years ago said they would have preferred to give birth if they'd only had more support. So thankfully, there is a lot more support, but it breaks my heart that obstetrics as a profession has decided that they will be the arbiters of what children should be born. And again, I hear story after story of my peers pressuring women not to have children, that they are the ones that in a paternalistic way that they have decided these women need to not have children. But I agree. I have seen in my own practice, when a family choose to give birth. And many of the women that I've cared for that have had children with life-limiting conditions, every single one of those families adored that child. I mean, I can recall so many times of fathers carrying a child, watching the Spurs, just the love for these children goes beyond the abilities that the children have. And so I just wish that people understood that. There has never been a study that's documented that a woman who chooses an abortion for a severe fetal anomaly has any improvement in her grief. And in fact, it is suspect that this is a really hard grief process because they've truncated that child that they desired, and many times under pressure. So we need to be having these discussions, and these stories that are being presented are so precious and valuable to just see how these children are loved.
Kathryn, what would you tell somebody who is struggling with the grief of loss? As you know, you've had Indiana in your arms, and you mourn her and you celebrate her. What's your message to those parents when it is life limiting and the precious lives end?
I feel like the joy that she brought us outweighs any of the moments of grief. We have memories, we have pictures. Our families got to meet her. I would go back and do it again. The first year of grief, I will say, was very, very hard. Grief changes, and it becomes, I say, like a pinch versus a stabbing pain. It doesn't fill the whole room. It fits in my pocket now. It gets easier. If I never got to enjoy her life, I would have grieved that. I would have grieved all the memories that we lost. Ending her life, that wouldn't have taken away the pain. It would have created a whole new avenue for pain.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to end with you, Beverly. I'm going to do a little disclaimer here at the end. I want to let you know about Standing With You. It's a website that Students for Life of America operates. It has services for women in all 50 states, local, state, and federal. We want to walk with you if you're in a moment of need. And I want Beverly to talk about what Verity's Village is also doing. But don't believe that no one's there to help. There's an army of people there to help. And you can learn more about all the stories that you've heard today on our website, in addition to more current events too. But when you hear the State of the Union on Thursday, I want you to remember, we pray for Kate Cox, but there's a whole other choice that can be made with a fetal diagnosis. So let me have you end, Beverly, just saying a little bit about what is available at Verity's Village. And I want to thank each one of you for sharing your story. What can we learn at Verity's Village, and what resources are available there?
Yeah, so Verity's Village has a private online support group. That's how we started before we even incorporated. It's From Diagnosis to Delivery. You can find us on Facebook. We also have social media channels where you can connect with us there, but we send out welcome packets. I have some here. We have a special pregnancy journal, our guidebook From Diagnosis to Delivery. It's everything I wish I could have known. There's a chapter on preparing for loss. How do you make that experience meaningful if you're going to go into the delivery room and possibly say goodbye to your child that day? Or how do you prepare for life? Because for me, that was almost more terrifying, is not knowing what resources were available. There's so many resources, not just for this part of the journey, but after. If you bring baby home, as we did, and now she's 7, and there's so many things I didn't know I was going to learn to be a medical mama, but I had help on this journey, and that's why we're pouring out, because we know resources seem to be few and far between, but we have not only the tangible resources that we can put in your hand, we can connect the parents with Kathryn, we have free counseling available, because this is hard on marriages. It's hard on families and siblings. We want to be able to come alongside and help with the mental and emotional and spiritual needs of the journey as well. And we honor babies, whether they are with us on earth, we send a congratulations package, or when they pass, we send a remembrance package as well, because we want to honor those precious lives and the parents who choose to carry them to term. So veritysvillage.com is where you can find us or connect on social media, but we would love to walk alongside anyone who's going through a journey like this.
Thank you all so much. Check out standingwithyou.com and Students for Life of America for more resources. And thank you all to our special guests. And tune into the State of the Union and remember that there's a different side to that story.